Flip your phone screen down. Kill the second monitor. Close every tab breathing in the background, because what just spilled out of the internal filing cabinets of Universal Music Group inside the last 72 hours is not a fan theory. Not a barbershop rumor. Not another recycled thumbnail dressed up to farm your outrage. It is a stack of dated, initialed, notarized, legally binding documents that just simultaneously touched down in the inboxes of 3 separate industry desks that do not share sources or editors. And that pile of paperwork lays bare something Drake has been quietly funneling millions into legal retainers, trying to keep buried for the last 18 months. Kendrick Lamar did not simply out-rap Drake. He did not merely outchart him. He walked into the same glass tower Drake spent a decade helping construct, rode the elevator to the executive floor Drake used to pose in front of on Instagram, and physically sat down in the corner suite Drake decorated inside his imagination every night before bed. Play that back one more time, because before we close this out, you are going to be reading this feud the exact same way the senior board members inside Universal are reading it right now. Drake did not lose a battle for the microphone. Drake lost the battle for the boardroom. And the sharpest twist buried inside the whole story is that the same corporate machine that turned Drake into a 9-figure global product line is the same corporate machine currently drafting Kendrick Lamar's coronation paperwork in triplicate. Straighten your spine, because if you thought Not Like Us was the finale, you have been watching the wrong show the entire time. Not Like Us was episode 1. This is the season finale. Before we crack this open one more inch, if you can already feel that this is not another Drake versus Kendrick Lamar comment section food fight, and is actually a corporate takeover about to rearrange hip-hop for the next decade, do me one favor and slap that like button so hard it apologizes. Punch subscribe if you are landing on the channel for the first time, because a second wave of leaked pages is sitting in the verification queue, with 2 independent insiders confirming signatures as we speak. What is inside that second envelope makes what we are covering today read like the trailer. Lock in with the channel, because you do not want to catch the follow-up 48 hours after everybody else has spoiled it in your comments. Walk the trail with me piece by piece, because to see the size of what Kendrick Lamar just executed, you have to watch the paperwork move in slow motion. Rewind to the fall of 2025. Drake filed a federal lawsuit against Universal Music Group, his own label, the machine that has been cashing his royalty envelopes since he was signing napkin deals in a Toronto basement. And what was the lawsuit about? One record. One single song. A track called Not Like Us. Drake argued in open court that the song painted him as a monster, that Universal had juiced the streaming counters to shove Kendrick Lamar over him, and that the label he treated like his second family had turned itself into a rifle pointed at his own chest. Federal Judge Jeanette Vargas reviewed the exhibits, weighed the briefs, and then she dropped the hammer. Dismissed. Sealed. Filed under nothing. The record, in the eyes of the federal bench, was protected artistic expression. Drake was left standing on the courthouse steps with a losing motion in one hand and a legacy taking on water in the other. So Drake did what Drake always does when the scoreboard reads against him. Drake appealed. In January of 2026, his legal team came back throwing haymakers, insisting that the lower court had wrapped diss records inside a magic invisible shield, their language, not mine, and now, in July of 2026, that appeal is quietly falling apart on the operating table because a fresh envelope of internal Universal documents has just slipped out into industry inboxes. And those documents lay bare a story Drake has been burning through his war chest, trying to keep 6 feet under. Kendrick Lamar was not merely being defended behind closed doors at Universal. He was being groomed as the entire future face of the label, and Drake was being politely, quietly, professionally walked to the exit door with his coat already folded across his arm. Here is where the floor moves under your feet. The leaked Universal paperwork, and I am going to break this down page by page because it matters more than any bar Drake has ever spit, exposes 3 moves that Drake's legal team is scrambling to keep sealed out of the appellate record. Piece of evidence number 1. The royalty rate stapled to Not Like Us was quietly bumped upward in Kendrick's favor after Drake filed his lawsuit. Read that back to yourself with your eyes wide open. Drake sued Universal claiming his rival was being unfairly propped up at his expense, and Universal's response inside its own accounting department was to hand that same rival a bigger cut of the pie on the exact record Drake was suing over. That is not a coincidence. That is not a rounding error. That is a corporation putting its answer key on the desk in permanent ink. That is Universal telegraphing to every executive in every corner office who they are riding with for the next chapter of the label's story. Piece of evidence number 2. The internal budget spreadsheets show that Universal's West Coast division, the same division that hosts the PG Lang Creative Campus, was assigned a marketing budget more than 3 times the size of the OVO Sound division for the 2026 fiscal calendar. 3 times. Let that soak into your ribs for a minute. Drake, the same Drake who dragged that label out of the CD graveyard, the same Drake who single-handedly carried Universal through the streaming pivot, the same Drake who built entire quarters of that company's earnings reports on his own back, is now getting a third of the promotional firepower going to the rival he tried to bury in federal court. If that is not the executive's sweet whispering into Drake's earpiece that his lease is up, I genuinely do not know what those words even mean anymore. Piece of evidence number 3, and this is the one that leaves the mark. A confidential internal memo stamped distribution restricted, stamped eyes only, shows senior Universal leadership sitting across the table from Kendrick Lamar and Dave Free to expand PG Lang from a boutique creative studio into a full-service label imprint operating directly beneath the Universal umbrella. Translation in plain English for the people in the back. Kendrick is about to own his masters, control his own distribution pipeline, sign his own artists, run his own label vertical. All of it. Every last piece of it. All of it inside the same corporate structure Drake spent 10 months in a federal courtroom trying to escape. Drake was suing to walk out the front door. Kendrick just walked in through the loading dock and started painting the walls a different color. You have to understand how rare a memo like that even is in the food chain of a major label. Universal does not casually approve imprint expansions. Those deals take months, sometimes years, of forecasting, projection modeling, audit committee sign-off, board review, and legal insulation. The fact that the memo even exists in a physical form means Universal has already run the numbers on him, and the numbers came back generational. The fact that the memo leaked at all means somebody inside the building wanted the rest of the industry to catch the smell before the announcement went official. Stack those 3 receipts side by side and stare at the outline they draw. A royalty bump on the very record Drake sued over. A marketing budget 3 times the size of Drake's own imprint. And a label vertical being handed to Drake's rival inside the very corporation Drake is trying to sue his way out of. That is not 3 unrelated business decisions bumping into each other on the same calendar. That is one coordinated pivot. That is the senior leadership of Universal Music Group choosing and writing in permanent record which artists they want at the front of the frame for the next 10 years. And the artist they picked is not the one wearing the L chain. The artist they picked is the one wearing the PG Lang hoodie. This is why the temperature inside the Universal skyscraper flipped overnight, because Drake's entire strategy across 2026 has been to bury Not Like Us underneath a blizzard of releases. When he rolled out Iceman in May, dropping it alongside Habibti and Meet the Owner, 3 full projects on the same Friday, every honest observer read the game plan in real time. Flood the zone. Drown out the loudest chorus in modern rap under 40-plus tracks of ambient static. Bank on volume. For about 6 weeks the play kind of worked. Iceman took aim at Kendrick Lamar, at DJ Khaled, at half the culture. Drake wanted the story to be Drake is back. Drake is unbothered. Drake is running the calendar. But here is the piece they do not want you to sit inside for very long. While Drake was writing verses to prove he still mattered, Kendrick Lamar was signing contracts to prove he owned the whole building. He did not respond to Iceman with a bar. He did not fire a subliminal. He did not sit for one interview, did not tap one podcast, did not repost one tweet. He walked into Universal boardrooms and drew fresh property lines in blue ink. And 6 weeks later, we finally understand exactly what the silence was purchasing. Drake was rapping. Kendrick was negotiating. Drake was suing. Kendrick was signing. Drake was on an arena stage screaming that Universal had betrayed him. Kendrick Lamar was in the meeting room next door quietly transforming himself into the single most valuable long-term asset that same Universal has stapled to its balance sheet in a generation. That is not the closing scoreboard of a rap beef. That is Jay-Z chess. That is Nas signing to Def Jam and walking off with a corner office and a president title. That is a rapper metamorphosing into an institution while his opponent is still trying to win the previous news cycle. And if you are still gripping any last shred of doubt that the industry has already cast its vote, then all you have to do is look at what went down at the BET Awards this year. Kendrick Lamar walked home with Best Male Hip-Hop Artist for the second consecutive year, taking the trophy over Drake, over J. Cole, over A$AP Rocky, over Baby Keem, over Big X The Plug, over DaBaby, over Don Toliver. Every heavyweight on the ballot. Every plausible spoiler. And he cleared the field like it was rented turf. Drake supporters flooded the timeline within the hour screaming rigged, screaming biased, screaming conspiracy, but the ledger does not read tweets. Kendrick Lamar is now the all-time leader when you combine the BET Awards and BET Hip Hop Awards. That is not a one-year outlier. That is a career-length pattern. The industry has been trying to tell Drake in a whisper for years that his rival is the artist and Drake is the entertainer, and when the internal vote tallies finally surfaced this week, we got a look at the margin. He did not edge Drake by a whisker. He landslided him. Voters inside Drake's own camp could not carry their guy across the finish line. Kendrick did not just take home a piece of hardware. He took the room, took the label, took the era, took the calendar year, and took the moral high ground with room to spare. Now pull the lens back, because you cannot tell this story properly without dragging Dave Free into the frame. Dave Free is the co-founder of PG Lang. Dave Free is the former president of Top Dog Entertainment. Dave Free is the strategist who has hand-drawn every major move Kendrick Lamar has made since the pandemic. He is the reason Kendrick walked out of TD without a chipped fingernail on his reputation. He is the reason PG Lang exists as a standalone creative company rather than a subsidiary on a major label's org chart. He is the reason Kendrick Lamar owns his masters, his publishing splits, his tour rights, his film and television rights, and every ancillary revenue stream most artists sign away before they even learn how to spell royalty. Dave Free confirmed on Instagram last week that the 7th studio album is finished. Not close. Not almost. Done. Mixed. Mastered. Sequenced. Loaded onto the delivery pipeline. And here is where it stitches directly back into the leaked Universal paperwork. Sources inside PG Lang confirm the album will be distributed through the newly upgraded PG Lang imprint under the Universal umbrella, meaning Kendrick is about to walk home with a bigger slice of the earnings on that record than Drake has ever cleared on any album at any point in his entire career. That is not just a business milestone. That is a cultural fault line splitting the ground in real time because for years the running argument in every barbershop, every group chat, every rap podcast was that Drake was the smarter businessman, that Drake understood the money, that Drake was building an empire while Kendrick Lamar was too busy making art nobody could put on urban radio. That entire argument just collapsed under its own weight overnight. Kendrick and Dave Free have assembled the single most powerful independent major hybrid structure in the history of the genre, and Drake is watching the whole thing unfold from a Toronto hotel room with 3 underperforming albums under his arm and an appeal his own legal team is quietly preparing to lose. Here's the piece the mainstream trade press is refusing to touch with a 10-foot cable. Drake is reportedly trying to negotiate his way out of Universal on the quiet, and he is trying to walk out with 43 unreleased songs still sitting on hard drives inside the OVO sound vault. Sources close to the OVO camp have been leaking this detail in fragments for weeks. Drake is hunting for a new distribution partner. Drake is done with the label he built alongside. Drake wants full ownership of his catalog handed back to him. On the surface, that reads like a mogul move. That reads like a boss flexing his leverage. But sit inside the reality of it for a second before you cheer. If Drake steps out of Universal, he loses the very promotional engine that manufactured him into Drake. He loses the marketing muscle that pushed Certified Lover Boy past 1 billion streams. He loses the corporate relationships that fed him every advantage in his previous shootouts with Meek Mill, with Pusha T, with every rapper who ever stepped into the ring with him. And who slides into the top slot on Universal's hip-hop priority chart the second Drake exits the elevator? Kendrick Lamar. He walks in through the same door Drake is walking out of. So Drake, in trying to sprint away from the empire he helped raise, is unknowingly clearing the throne for his rival to walk in, repaint the walls, rewrite the mission statement, and hire the next generation of executives who will never bother returning Drake's calls again. This is the corporate mirror of the exact line Kendrick Lamar buried Drake with on Not Like Us. They not like us. Except now Drake is not the target inside the room. Drake is the guy standing on the sidewalk outside the building. Drake is the one holding 43 homeless songs that nobody at his label wants to promote because the 7th Kendrick Lamar album is landing on the same distribution pipeline that used to have Drake's name printed on the front door. Drake did not just lose a diss battle. He lost his corporate address, and Kendrick did not have to write a single new bar to make it happen. Pull the lens all the way back for a beat, because you have to understand how vanishingly rare an ending like this even is in hip-hop history. Rap beefs come. Rap beefs go. Jay-Z and Nas traded blows, and eventually Nas signed to Def Jam under Jay-Z's watch. 50 Cent buried Ja Rule, but never once walked into Murder Incorporated's boardroom. Pusha T ended a version of Drake in 2018, but never came within a zip code of steering the flow of Universal's marketing dollars. Meek Mill and Drake had a moment that flamed out inside one summer. Every generation gets its defining rap beef, and almost every single one of those beefs eventually gets absorbed by time into a fun little Wikipedia footnote. Somebody drops a mediocre response, somebody else changes the subject, the fans move to the next drama, and the whole thing turns into a bar trivia question at a Buffalo Wild Wings on a Tuesday. But Kendrick Lamar refused to let this one fade into the ether. Kendrick Lamar picked the beef up, sharpened its edges into a scalpel, and weaponized it into a career-cementing, industry-realigning, culture-flipping event that will sit inside hip-hop textbooks for the next 50 years. He drove Not Like Us to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. He performed it at the Super Bowl halftime show in front of 130 million pairs of eyeballs. He cleared 5 Grammys off a single record, including Record of the Year for Luther with SZA at the 2026 ceremony. He walked home with Best Male Hip-Hop Artist on back-to-back BET runs. And now Kendrick is being locked in as the Coachella 2026 headliner, according to early word out of Hits Daily Double. Drake, inside that identical window of calendar time, has been filing lawsuits, losing lawsuits, dropping 3 albums the culture has already forgotten, and watching his own label pick his rival over him in ink on internal letterhead. That is not a beef anymore. That is a coronation. That is a West Coast crown being welded onto Kendrick's head with an industrial torch while Drake sits alone scrolling through the comments of a repost hunting for one supporter who still means the words they typed. He did not merely win. He sealed himself as the greatest rapper of his generation, and the corporate filing cabinets at Universal just co-signed the certification in permanent ink. So what happens next? Where does Kendrick point the next weapon, and what does Drake even have left in his holster to swing with? For the PG-Lang camp, the roadmap is drawn in bright neon. The 7th album drops before the calendar year closes. PG-Lang expands into film, television, and fashion, all filed under the same protective umbrella that keeps Kendrick and Dave free, the sole controlling owners of every last brick. New signings like Amari, who is just officially announced on the roster, get room to grow inside a machine that actually promotes its own instead of throwing them onto a shelf to expire. And the Coachella headline slot is not going to be marketed as a festival booking. It is going to be marketed as a victory lap on a beef he closed the book on more than a full year ago. For Drake, the roadmap turns uglier by the week. The appeal on the Not Like Us lawsuit is expected to land inside the next couple of months, and every legal analyst on every podcast circuit is already forecasting a second loss stacked on top of the first. If Drake bails on Universal, he becomes independent for the first time in his career, and the industry has never once figured out how to promote an independent Drake because there has never been one to figure out. If Drake stays inside Universal, he becomes the #2 priority behind Kendrick, a humiliation his ego has never been engineered to survive. If Drake fires back musically, he risks another Meet the Graham-style shockwave from Kendrick Lamar, a shot that came a hair away from finishing his career on the first pass and would almost certainly finish the job on the second pass with room to spare. Drake is boxed into a corner he built with his own 2 hands, and Kendrick is the architect who walled him in without ever once raising his voice above a whisper. And listen, whether you ride for Drake, whether you ride for Kendrick Lamar, whether you are neutral in the whole affair, you have to give the game its respect at this exact moment. Because what Kendrick Lamar just executed is the new playbook for every rapper trying to build something that outlasts a 2-week promotional cycle. He did not win because he raps harder, though the record shows he does. He did not win because he releases more, though his rollouts get written up like feature-length films. He won because he understood the deepest hidden rule of the modern rap game. This is a business. This is a corporation. And corporations are conquered with paperwork, with ownership stakes, with long-term positioning, and with a co-pilot in Dave Free who read the chessboard 3 moves ahead, while the rest of the industry was still watching the pieces move. Kendrick and Dave Free built PG Lang at a stage in his career when he was already a multimillionaire, but they built it like they were still broke and hungry sleeping on a studio floor in Compton. They negotiated harder contracts. They kept the masters. They surrounded themselves with a team of long-term loyalists nobody on the outside could bribe. They played the 20-year game. Drake played the 20-week game. Drake chased streaming stunts. Drake chased radio ads. Drake chased trend cycles. Drake chased chart headlines. And here in the summer of 2026, Kendrick is holding the deed to the future while Drake is holding 3 albums the algorithm is already burying under fresh releases from artists who were toddlers when he dropped So Far Gone. This is the reason Kendrick Lamar is the greatest rapper of his generation. Not because he rhymes better, though he does. Not because he sells more, though the numbers now say he does. But because he treated hip-hop like the corporation it was always destined to become, and installed himself as the chief executive while Drake was still auditioning for the role of marketing mascot on the poster in the lobby. There is one last piece I have to leave you with before we roll credits, because it matters more than most of the industry has bothered to notice. There is a phrase that has been circulating quietly inside PG Lang's inner circle for the past few weeks, repeated by 2 separate sources with zero connection to each other. The phrase is, "We are building a legacy label." Legacy label. Not a boutique. Not a vanity imprint. Not a distribution shell. A legacy label. That is the exact vocabulary that used to describe Def Jam under Russell Simmons in the mid-80s. That is the exact vocabulary that used to describe Death Row under Suge Knight in the mid-90s. That is the exact vocabulary that used to describe Rockefeller before Jay-Z carried Rock Nation over to Universal. Legacy labels are not built by rappers who lose beefs and file appeals in Manhattan federal courtrooms. Legacy labels are built by architects who understand that music is a product, ownership is a weapon, and time is the only asset nobody can print more of. Kendrick and Dave Free understand all 3 of those pillars in their bones. Drake, based on his last 12 months of documented decisions, does not appear to understand a single one of them. That is the real gap between these 2 artists in the year 2026. Not the gap on the microphone. The gap in worldview. So there it is. Every angle on the table, receipts stapled to it. Kendrick Lamar just hijacked Drake's own record label from the inside out. The leaked Universal paperwork proves it in black and white ink. The BET Awards confirmed it in hardware. The dismissed federal lawsuits sealed the legal side. And the incoming 7th album is going to hammer the last nail into a beef Drake originally started and Kendrick finished in ways he could not have drawn on his worst nightmare whiteboard. This is the biggest power shift hip-hop has seen since Jay-Z built Rock Nation from a napkin sketch into a global entertainment conglomerate, and you got the anatomy of it right here, first on this channel before anybody else even opened their inbox. If this breakdown hit for you, if you learned something new, if you can feel the gravity of what just happened tilting the floor of the whole genre, do me one small thing before you swipe away. Slap that like button, subscribe if you have not already because the second batch of leaked pages drops the second they clear the fact-check pass, and drop your red in the comments below telling me what you think Kendrick's next move is going to be. Is the 7th album landing in October? Is Coachella officially locked in? Is Drake really about to walk out of Universal carrying 43 homeless songs in a duffel bag? Tell me who you are riding with in this new era of the culture. I read every single comment, and the sharpest takes are getting pinned to the top of the pile.